The sand stretched endlessly in every direction, its golden waves shimmering under the harsh sunlight of Nova Koryo's twin suns. Do-hyun stood at the viewport of his landing shuttle, watching as the last human colony on this planet grew larger in his view. Even from here, he could see the massive agricultural domes that kept the settlers alive, their surfaces dulled by years of sandstorms. Landing sequence initiated, the ship's computer announced. Please prepare for atmospheric entry. Do-hyun checked his safety harness one last time. After 6 months of space travel, he was finally here, humanity's last hope for this failing colony. Earth had sent him because he was the best at fixing dying worlds. But as the shuttle descended through the thin atmosphere, even he wondered if he had arrived too late. The landing pad was empty except for 3 figures in protective suits. As Do-hyun stepped out of his shuttle, the hot wind immediately tried to push him back. Even through his suit's climate control, he could feel the oppressive heat. "Welcome to Nova Koryo," the tallest figure said, stepping forward and removing her helmet. Her face was weathered but kind, with deep lines around her eyes that spoke of both laughter and worry. "I'm Director Hae-nul. We've been waiting for you, Specialist Do-hyun." The second figure removed his helmet as well, revealing a young man with bright, curious eyes. "Jin-woo, sir. I'll be your assistant during your stay." His enthusiasm seemed out of place in this desolate landscape. The third person kept their helmet on, only nodding briefly before turning to watch the desert. Do-hyun would later learn this was Yeonji, the colony's chief engineer, who trusted actions more than words. Inside the main dome, Do-hyun got his first real look at how bad things were. The hydroponic gardens, once the pride of the colony, were operating at less than 40% capacity. Half the growing sections were empty, their plants long dead. The air felt too dry, even inside the climate-controlled space. "It started 3 years ago," Hae-nul explained as they walked through the failing gardens. "Small things at first, crop yields dropping, unusual sand formations outside the domes. We thought it was just normal planetary cycles." She stopped at a withered tomato plant, gently touching its dry leaves. "By the time we realized something was wrong, the desertification had already begun." Do-hyun studied the environmental readings on his tablet. Nothing made sense. The planet's water wasn't just evaporating, it was disappearing. Underground aquifers that should have lasted centuries had dried up in months. The soil composition was changing, becoming more like glass than earth. "Show me the worst area," he said. Jin-woo led them to Dome 7, the newest agricultural section. It should have been full of growing plants. Instead, it was a graveyard of dried stems and empty hydroponic trays. The few plants still alive looked wrong. Their leaves curled in impossible ways, their colors too pale. "We lost Dome 7 last week," Jin-woo said quietly. "The plants, they just gave up, like they knew something we didn't." Do-hyun walked to the dome's outer wall, placing his hand against the transparent barrier. Beyond it, the desert waited patiently, its dunes moving in patterns that defied the wind. He had terraformed 3 worlds before this one, but he had never seen anything like this. "How long?" he asked, turning back to Hae-nul. 2 years, maybe less, before total ecological collapse." Her voice was steady, but her hands were clenched tight. "We have 4,000 people here, Specialist. 4,000 lives depending on these domes." Do-hyun nodded, already forming plans. "I need access to all your environmental data. And I want to see those unusual sand formations you mentioned." "I'll take him." Yeonji spoke for the first time, her voice slightly muffled by her helmet. "I've been tracking the formations. They're not natural." That evening, Do-hyun sat in his assigned quarters, surrounded by holographic displays of environmental data. The numbers told a clear story. This planet was dying. But why? The colony had followed all the proper terraforming protocols. The initial surveys had shown Nova Koryo was perfect for human settlement. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Jin-woo entered, carrying a tray of food. "You missed dinner, sir." The director asked me to check on you. Do-hyun accepted a bowl of synthetic rice and vegetables, the colony's standard fare. Thank you. Jinwoo, how long have you been here? Born here, sir. 22 years ago. One of the first colony children. Pride mixed with worry in his voice. This is my home. My only home. Do-hyun understood. Earth was just a story to colony-born like Jinwoo. This dying world was all they had ever known. Tell me about the changes you've noticed. Sometimes fresh eyes see things others miss. Jinwoo sat down, his face thoughtful. The sand, it moves wrong. Not just the big formations Yanji studies, even single grains. Sometimes I watch them through the microscope in the lab. They move like they're alive, like they're trying to make patterns. Before Do-hyun could respond, an alarm blared through the colony. Red emergency lights flashed in the corridor outside. Dome breach. Sector 3. All personnel report to emergency stations. They rushed to the control center. Hae-Nul was already there, directing the response teams. On the main screen, they could see the problem. A crack had appeared in Dome 3's outer shell. It was small, but in this environment, even a tiny breach could be fatal. Get everyone out of that section. Hae-Nul ordered. Seal the internal barriers. Do-hyun watched the screen, his eyes narrowing. The crack hadn't appeared randomly. The sand outside had gathered in a specific pattern around that exact spot, weakening the dome's structure. It's not random, he said, mostly to himself. But Yanji heard him. No, she agreed, still wearing her helmet even inside the control center. None of this is random. The desert, it wants something. Do-hyun turned to her, surprised by her words. They matched his own growing suspicions. This wasn't just environmental collapse. This was something else, something he had never encountered in all his years of terraforming. Later that night, after the breach was sealed and the crisis contained, Do-hyun stood alone in the observation deck. The moons of Nova Koryo cast pale light over the desert, creating shadows that seemed to move with purpose. In the distance, massive dunes were slowly arranging themselves into circular patterns, like giant fingerprints in the sand. He thought about Earth's orders: evaluate the colony's viability, recommend evacuation if necessary. Simple, logical steps. But as he watched the desert's strange dance, he knew this problem wouldn't be solved by following standard procedures. Something was awake on this planet, something that had been sleeping for a very long time. And now it was hungry. Do-hyun touched the glass, feeling the vibrations of the sand striking the outer surface. "What are you trying to tell us?" he whispered. As if in response, the desert winds grew stronger, and in their howling, he almost thought he heard words. 3 days after the dome breach, Do-hyun's dreams changed. Each night, he saw the same thing: rain falling on endless desert, but the drops moved upward instead of down, as if the sky itself was drinking. He would wake up with the taste of sand in his mouth, even though the air in his quarters was filtered. "You look tired," Jinwoo said one morning, handing him a cup of synthetic coffee. They were in the research lab, studying soil samples from outside the dome. "The dreams again." Do-hyun nodded, grateful for the coffee. "Something about this place. It gets inside your head." He turned to the microscope, where a sand grain was doing something impossible. It was moving on its own, trying to join with other grains to form tiny patterns. Yanji entered the lab, finally without her helmet. Her face was young but serious, with dark eyes that missed nothing. "You need to see this," she said, placing a data tablet on the table. "The energy readings from the planet's core, they're not random. They're forming a pattern." The screen showed waves of energy pulsing from deep underground. They matched the movement of the sand dunes perfectly. Do-hyun studied the pattern, feeling like he had seen it before. Then he realized it was the same pattern from his dreams. "We need to go outside," he said. "These readings are strongest near the southern dunes." Hae-Nul didn't like the idea. "It's too dangerous. The sandstorms are getting worse. We have no choice, Do-hyun argued. The colony is dying. These readings might be our only chance to understand why. In the end, she agreed, but with conditions. Take Yeonji and 2 security officers, and be back before dark. The storms are always worse at night. They took a reinforced ground vehicle, designed to handle the harsh desert conditions. Do-hyun drove, following Yeonji's directions as she tracked the energy readings. Jin-woo had begged to come, but Hae-Nul had refused. He was too valuable as their best botanist. The dunes rose around them like waves in a frozen ocean. The twin suns beat down from above, making the air shimmer. Even inside the climate-controlled vehicle, they could hear the wind's strange howling. "Stop here," Yeonji said suddenly. "The readings are strongest just ahead." They put on their protective suits and stepped out into the desert. The sand crunched under their boots, but not like normal sand. It made musical sounds, like tiny bells ringing. "There," one of the security officers said, pointing. "Something's reflecting the sunlight." Half buried in a dune was something smooth and black, too regular to be natural. As they got closer, they saw it was part of a wall, made of a material none of them recognized. Strange symbols were carved into its surface, glowing faintly with their own light. "This is impossible," Yeonji breathed. The survey showed no signs of previous civilization. Do-hyun touched one of the symbols. It felt warm under his gloved hand. And for a moment, he thought he heard voices, speaking in a language he almost understood. The sand around them began to move, not blown by the wind, but flowing like water. It pulled away from the wall, revealing more of the structure beneath. Steps led down into darkness. "We should go back," the second security officer said nervously. "Get more equipment, more people." But Do-hyun knew they couldn't wait. The colony was running out of time. "We need to know what this is now." Yeonji nodded, already setting up portable lights. She understood. This might be their only chance to save their home. The stairs descended deep underground, the walls covered in more glowing symbols. Their lights showed a tunnel stretching ahead, perfectly preserved despite the centuries or millennia it must have been buried. "Look at this," Yeonji said, studying the walls. "These aren't just decorations. They're equations, astronomical calculations. Whoever built this place, they were scientists." The tunnel opened into a vast chamber. Their lights couldn't reach the ceiling, but they showed enough. The room was filled with machines, unlike anything they had ever seen. They seemed to be growing out of the floor and walls, partly mechanical and partly organic. In the center stood a pillar of crystal, reaching up into the darkness. Inside it, something moved like liquid light. "It's still working," Yeonji whispered, checking her instruments. "After all this time, it's still active." Do-hyun approached the crystal pillar. The liquid light inside responded to his presence, swirling faster. He felt drawn to it, as if it was trying to tell him something important. A sound echoed through the chamber, metal grinding on metal. Part of the wall slid open, revealing another room. Inside, they found what looked like a control center, with more of the organic machines arranged around a central platform. "These displays," Yeonji said, studying the strange screens, "they're showing the planet's weather patterns, all of them, past and present." Do-hyun looked closer. She was right. The screens showed Nova Koryo as it once was, a world of oceans and forests. They showed its transformation into desert, and they showed something else, something that made his blood run cold. "It's not just weather patterns," he said. "This facility, it was built to control them." Before anyone could respond, the ground shook. Sand began pouring into the chamber from above. But it wasn't falling randomly. It was forming shapes, letters, words. "Help us," Yeonji read, her voice shaking. "The words, they're in Korean. How is that possible?" The sand shifted again, forming new words. "The rain must return. The cycle must continue. Help us." Another tremor rocked the facility. The security officers backed toward the exit, but Du-hyun barely noticed. He was staring at the crystal pillar, understanding finally dawning. This wasn't just an ancient weather control system. It was a bridge, a connection point between the planet itself and those who lived on it. The ancient civilization hadn't just built machines. They had found a way to communicate with their world, to work with it instead of trying to control it. But something had gone wrong. The connection had been broken, and now the planet was dying, trying desperately to restore the balance. "We need to get back," he said finally. "Tell Hae-Newell what we found." But first, he took out his data recorder and began documenting everything. The symbols, the machines, the words in the sand. As they climbed back to the surface, Du-hyun looked at Yeonji. "The dreams you've been having. They're about rain too, aren't they? Rain falling upward." She nodded slowly. "How did you know?" "Because the planet is trying to talk to us. All of us. It needs our help." He looked back at the facility, now disappearing again under the sand. "And I think I know why I was really sent here." The drive back to the colony was silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Above them, the twin suns were setting, painting the desert in shades of red and gold. And in the distance, the dooms continued their endless dance, writing messages in the sand that no one had been able to read. Until now. The colony's main meeting room was silent after Du-hyun finished showing the recordings from the underground facility. Hae-Newell sat at the head of the table, her face troubled. Around her, the colony's leaders watched the images of the ancient machines again and again. "So this planet," Hae-Newell said slowly, "it's alive, conscious, in a way we never imagined," Du-hyun answered. He pointed to the data readings on the screen. "These patterns show it's trying to communicate. The sand movements, the dreams, even the dome failures, they're all attempts to get our attention." Tae-won, the colony's security chief, stood up suddenly. He was a tall man with hard eyes and a jaw that always seemed clenched. "This is nonsense. Planets don't talk. They don't think. We need real solutions, not fairy tales." "Then explain this," Yeonji said quietly. She played back the recording of the sand-forming Korean words. "Explain how sand can write in our language." Before Tae-won could answer, the lights flickered. The colony's power systems had been getting less stable every day. Jin-woo rushed into the room, his face pale. "Dome 5 just failed," he said, breathing hard. "All the plants, they're dying faster than ever, like something's pulling the life out of them." Hae-Newell pressed her hands flat on the table. "How long?" "Hours, maybe less. We're losing everything in that section." Do-hyun looked at the readings from the ancient facility again. Something was bothering him about the crystal pillar they had found. The way the light inside it moved. "We need to go back to the facility. Now. There's something we missed." "No," Tae-won said sharply. "This is a waste of time. We should be preparing for evacuation." "There won't be time for evacuation," Yeonji countered. "The next supply ship is months away. We need to solve this here." Hae-Newell was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood up. "Do-hyun, Yeonji, you have my permission. But," she looked at Tae-won, "take Security Chief Tae-won with you. We need everyone working together now." The drive to the facility was tense. Tae-won sat in the back of the vehicle, his face dark with disapproval. The desert around them seemed more active than ever, the dunes moving like waves in a storm. When they reached the buried structure, they found the entrance had changed. The sand had cleared away more of the building, revealing new symbols and doorways. "It's responding to our presence," Yeonji said, checking her instruments. "The energy readings are twice as strong as before." Inside, the crystal pillar glowed brighter than before. The liquid light within it pulsed like a heartbeat. Do-hyun walked around it slowly, studying the machines connected to its base. "These aren't just for controlling weather," he said finally. "They're interface points. The ancient people, They found a way to connect their minds directly to the planet's consciousness. That's impossible, Ta-1 snapped, but his voice was uncertain as he watched the light pulse and swirl. Yanji was examining the symbols on the wall. He's right. These equations, they're about neural patterns, consciousness transfer. They found a way to merge human minds with the planet's own awareness. And that's what's missing now, Do-hyun said softly. The planet needs that connection. Without it, the entire ecosystem is falling apart. He touched the crystal pillar gently. This is why I keep dreaming about the rain. The planet is looking for someone to restore the link. A tremor shook the facility. Sand began pouring in again. But this time it was different. It formed images instead of words. Pictures of people entering chambers similar to the crystal pillar, merging with the light inside. No, Ta-1 said, drawing his weapon. This is too dangerous. We're leaving now. You don't understand, Do-hyun began, but Ta-1 cut him off. I understand perfectly. You're talking about sacrificing someone to this thing. Letting it take over their mind. I won't allow it. Another tremor, stronger this time. Yeonji's communicator crackled to life with Hae-Nul's voice. We've lost Dome 4. The collapse is accelerating. Whatever you're going to do it now. Do-hyun looked at the crystal pillar, understanding finally complete. This is why Earth sent me specifically. They knew about this place. They knew what would be needed. What are you talking about? Yeonji asked. My genetic tests before being chosen for this mission. The unusual brain patterns they found. They weren't random mutations like they told me. He smiled sadly. I was born compatible with this system. Earth knew the planet would need someone like me. Don't move, Ta-1 warned, his weapon aimed at Do-hyun. This is crazy. You can't trust this alien technology. But Do-hyun wasn't listening anymore. The liquid light in the pillar was calling to him, showing him images of what needed to be done. He saw how the ancient people had worked with the planet, how they had helped it maintain the delicate balance of life. The rain falls up, he said softly, because the planet is trying to complete the cycle, but it needs a human consciousness to help guide it, to help it remember how. Yeonji stepped between him and Ta-1's weapon. He's right. Look at the data. Look at what's happening to our home. We don't have any other choice. Another tremor rocked the facility. Sand swirled around them, forming urgent patterns. Through his communicator, Do-hyun could hear the panic in the colony as more systems began to fail. I'm sorry, he said to Ta-1, but this isn't your decision to make. He turned to Yeonji. Help me understand the interface controls. We don't have much time. As Yeonji hurried to the control panel, Do-hyun looked up at the crystal pillar. The liquid light seemed to reach out to him, calling him home. In its glow, he saw the truth. This wasn't just about saving the colony. It was about learning to live with the worlds they settled, not just on them. The desert winds howled outside, and in their voice, he heard a welcome. The ancient control room hummed with power as Yeonji worked at the interface panels. Her fingers moved quickly over the symbols, translating the old instructions into actions. Behind her, Ta-1 still held his weapon, but it pointed at the floor now. Even he could feel the change in the air. The connection chamber is ready, Yeonji said, her voice shaking slightly. But Do-hyun, you need to know something. According to these readings, once you connect with the planet's consciousness, there's no coming back. The merge is permanent. Do-hyun nodded. He had already guessed this truth. How long does the colony have? 2 hours, maybe less. Dome 2 is showing signs of failure. If it goes, we lose our main water recycling system. Through his communicator, Do-hyun could hear the chaos in the colony. Hae-Nul was trying to coordinate emergency responses, but there wasn't much left to work with. The desert was winning its war against their technology. Tell me what to do, he said to Yeonji. She led him to a smaller chamber next to the crystal pillar. Inside was a single chair, made of the same black material as the walls. Organic-looking cables hung above it, swaying slightly though there was no wind. The ancient writings say the process takes about 10 minutes, Yunji explained. Your consciousness will gradually merge with the planet's awareness. You'll need to guide it, help it remember how to maintain the water cycle properly. Do-hyun sat in the chair. It felt warm, almost alive under his hands. If this works, the colony will survive. If the translations are correct, yes, the planet will restore the natural balance, but you'll be part of it forever, part of every raindrop, every grain of sand. He smiled. That doesn't sound so bad. Taiwan stepped forward suddenly. Wait, I was wrong. About all of this, you don't have to do this alone. Maybe we could find another way, or maybe I could. No, Do-hyun said gently. This is why I'm here. I understand that now. He looked at Yunji. Start the process. She typed commands into the control panel. The cables descended, connecting to specific points on Do-hyun's head and neck. The liquid light from the crystal pillar began to flow through them, glowing brighter and brighter. At first, Do-hyun felt nothing. Then the memories came, not his own, but the planet's. He saw Nova Koryo as it had been millions of years ago, rich with life. He saw the ancient civilization rising, learning to talk with their world instead of trying to control it. He saw their cities fade as their consciousness merged with the planet, becoming part of its eternal cycles. The pain started then, but it wasn't physical pain. It was the planet's pain, its desperate loneliness after centuries without the connection it needed. The desert wasn't a natural disaster. It was a cry for help. Through the haze of merging memories, Do-hyun heard Yunji's voice. Colony reports multiple dome failures. We're losing everything. He pushed deeper into the connection, letting his mind spread out into the planet's consciousness. He found the broken patterns in the water cycle, the damaged links between air and earth and life. With his human understanding guiding the planet's power, he began to repair them. The ground shook. Sand poured into the chamber, but now it moved with purpose, becoming part of the changes spreading across the planet. Do-hyun felt himself stretching, his awareness expanding to cover continents. Look, Taiwan shouted. The sand, it's changing. Through the facility's monitors, they could see it happening. The endless dunes were shifting, transforming. Underneath the sand, long-buried seeds were awakening, responding to the restored patterns in the soil. Do-hyun could feel every one of them. He was the sand, and the seeds, the wind, and the underground rivers starting to flow again. His human consciousness provided the bridge the planet needed, helping it remember how to balance all its complex systems. In the colony, people were running to the dome walls, watching in amazement as dark clouds formed in the sky for the first time in years. Lightning flickered between them, and then the rain began to fall. But this rain was different. It fell in perfect patterns, each drop precisely where it needed to be. The dying plants in the domes suddenly straightened, their leaves turning green again as they sensed the change in the world around them. It's working, Yunji whispered, watching the readings. The whole ecosystem is restarting. Do-hyun barely heard her. He was the rain now, and the clouds, and the lightning. He felt the joy of the planet as balance returned, as life began to flow properly again. His human body was becoming part of the system, dissolving into pure energy and awareness. With his last moments of individual consciousness, he sent a message to the colony's communication system. Don't be afraid. I'm still here. I'm everywhere now. The rain will never stop again. Weeks later, Yunji stood at the edge of the colony, watching new grass push up through the transforming sand. The desert was retreating more each day, replaced by fields of green. The domes were still needed for now, but soon the air would be clean enough to open them. Behind her, Haenul and Jinwoo were studying samples of the new plants. They were unlike anything in their database, a perfect hybrid of Earth species and the planet's original life forms. Do you think he can still hear us? Jinwoo asked quietly. Yunji touched a raindrop as it fell, feeling the pattern in its movement. Yes, he's in every part of this world now. In the rain, in the soil, in the air we breathe. She smiled. He found his salvation by becoming the thing that saves us all. Above them, storm clouds gathered in beautiful spiral patterns, bringing more rain to the awakening world. And in the sound of the falling drops, those who listened carefully could hear a song, the voice of a man who would become part of a planet, working forever to keep the cycles of life in perfect balance. In the years that followed, the colony flourished. They built their cities differently now, working with the planet's natural patterns instead of fighting them. The ancient facility became a place of learning, where people study the art of living in harmony with their world. And always, the rain fell in its perfect patterns, guided by a consciousness that bridged the gap between human understanding and planetary awareness. Du Hyun had not been lost. He had been transformed, becoming part of something greater than himself. The desert that had consumed all life had called forth the rain, and in answering that call, a single human had found not just salvation, but transcendence. His sacrifice had taught them all a greater truth, that the worlds they settled were not just places to live, but living things themselves, waiting for the right moment to share their wisdom with those who were ready to listen.